For most of us, the warmth of the season creates a sense of excitement and anticipation. But for those imprisoned in loneliness or grief, the month of December can be torturous. The loss of a loved one often leads us to re-examine our faith. How secure are the moorings? Mary Wilson has taken that journey too many times. Her faith not only held, but was strengthened. How thankful we are to have Mary on our prayer lines and right here today. Mary, you had a firm foundation from your childhood. A household of faith is what you grew up in.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was brought up in Kenya and born and raised in a very traditional Christian family, loving parents and very dedicated, loyal to the church as well. And so that has kind of was the foundation that we were brought and raised up in.
C.S. Lewis said, "The death of a beloved is an amputation." And even with that trust in Jesus and a supportive family, the pain at 9, that's when you first dealt with bereavement and grief.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, that was the first time that we experienced that around the age of 9, when we first experienced as a family loss. And this was my sister, my oldest sister, was diagnosed with sickle cell disorder. And unfortunately, with all the medical attention and care that my parents were able to provide for her and support from the church and prayers, she passed away at a very young age. And so this was our first experience with grief as a family. And it was very devastating. It was devastating to all of us, and also to see how it impacted my parents and made them feel very helpless.
You were saying that because of the suffering you saw in your parents, you just, as a little 9-year-old, you just stuffed your own pain far away.
Yeah.
Oh, what about your faith?
That was actually the beginning of what my thinking faith, ignited my thinking faith. I think it's more of what Paul talks about in Corinthians about infancy, spiritual infancy, because I thought like a child. I had a very fragmented idea of what death and resurrection and crucifixion was.
You thought your sister would rise from
the dead? I did. I knew that just with all the prayers and all the support from the church and family, that's what was going to happen. And obviously that didn't happen.
Then what? Yeah. Then who is God? What did that 9-year-old conclude?
Yeah, it continued. I pressed on. Wanting to find answers, wanting to know this God, because I knew him as bigger than anything, even as young as I was. And subsequently, I got to discover more of who God was.
This yearning was so passionate in you. 4 altar calls you responded to?
I did.
As if God might not answer fully the first time.
Absolutely. And my very fragmented kind of innocent faith, I thought that if I answered to more altar calls, God would draw God closer to me, and my faith would absolutely be stronger as well. So, yeah.
You know, C.S. Lewis said, this is in A Grief Observed. He said, "We were promised sufferings. They were part of the program. We were even told, 'Blessed are they that mourn,' and I accepted. I've got nothing that I haven't bargained for. Of course, it is different when the thing happens to oneself, not to others, and in reality, not in imagination. How often? Will it be for always? How often will the vast emptiness astonish me?" You can identify with that vast emptiness. Years later, your husband would die way too early, leaving you with a 10 and a 6-year-old child.
Absolutely.
A widow.
Yes. And that was a very traumatic time for me. It was very unexpected, and even though I'd experienced loss through the years, I had to grieve differently because I had to prioritize my children. I had to ensure that they were supported and they were cared for, and I almost felt like I didn't want to impose on their journey and their healing by them watching me grieve. So I try to take that away from them and ensure and prioritize their well-being.
And yet you went through all the stages of grief in these losses, and we've skipped over 3 brothers
Absolutely.
who died of sickle cell anemia at 15, 26, and 31. This has been a plague in your family.
Absolutely.
Just multiple losses, compound losses. You would tell anyone watching today that the grief work is essential. You can't just stuff it away.
Absolutely. I've discovered through the losses that I've experienced is that the only way out of grief is through it. And so essentially it's finding the support systems in place and being able to entrust your care and entrust God with your fears, your worries, your tears, and all the questions that you might have, and really entrust Him to guide you through it. And that's what enabled me to get through my journey with grief.
We're going to walk further with Mary in this journey of grief, how to cope, how to move forward in the plan that God has for your life. Please stay with us.